Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for our August 17th work session. I'd like to take a moment of silence to recognize the passing of Clear Spring Mayor Paul Hose, who passed away on August 8th. Mayor Hose served as the Vice Mayor of Clear Spring from 1982 to 1983, and then was mayor from 84 to 89, and then from 1992 until the present. He received a presidential citation from the Maryland Municipal League in recognition of being the longest-serving mayor in Washington County. So if we could just take a moment of silence, please. Thank you. Up first today, we have the preliminary agenda review. So stop me if you have any questions. We'll call the meeting to order at 7 o'clock. On the 24th, have the invocation, pledge to the flag. We'll follow the rules and procedures effective December 15th, 2020. Our meeting schedule for September will be September 7th, no meeting. September 14th to 21st, we'll have a work session at 4 o'clock, and September 28th, we'll have a regular session at 7 p.m. We have appointments to the City Ethics Commission and the Hagerstown Youth Council. We have citizen comments, a public hearing on the Land Management Code amendments for small-scale breweries, wineries, and distilleries. Approval of the minutes. The consent agenda has the Community and Economic Development Street Closure for Explore BISFA event, IT Tyler Pace 15 training package renewal for $12,363.75, ESRI GIS renewal for $38,500. Parks, we have renovation of public restrooms adjacent to the Fit Room and BMX track, $154,599. Planning and Code Administration, we have a court-ordered repair for $18,662. For police, we have the annual software maintenance agreement with Keystone Public Safety for $104,439. A 2021 Ford Explorer for Sheehy Ford for $35,908.40. 2021 Ford F-250 for Keystone Ford for $33,830. For utilities, wastewater grinder pump retrofit, $56,485. Wastewater airlift pump, $62,662. And wastewater prep and spray lining of sanitary sewer manholes for $33,810. No unfinished business. Under new business, we have introduction of an ordinance to amend the code of the City of Hagerstown, Chapter 10, Article XIII, entitled Hagerstown Loan Review Authority, to add qualifications of members. Approval of amendments to the CDBG Annual Action Plan, approval of a resolution, approval of a parking lease for central parking lot with the state of Maryland for use by SDAT, approval of a resolution for the parking lease for University District parking deck with state of Maryland for use by the District Court of Maryland, approval of the resolutions, execution of residential lease agreements at the City of Hagerstown properties 12727 Ritchie Road in Smithsburg, and 23510 Warner Hollow Road in Smithsburg. Approval of a resolution, execution of a financial incentive agreement between the City of Hagerstown and Aries Investment Group, LLC for 8698 West Washington Street. Approval of a resolution, execution of a financial incentive agreement between the City of Hagerstown and Gideon Properties for the Holly Project at 72 West Washington. Approval of a lease agreement to Foundry, 6 North Potomac Street. Approval of an agreement, reimbursement agreement with the Convention and Visitors Bureau, funds for skate park. Approval of a reimbursement to the Washington County Narcotics Task Force. Approval of acceptance of Maryland Criminal Intelligence Network grant. Approval of firefighter upstaffing request, and approval of a street closure for the Jonathan Street cabin ribbon cutting. City Administrator comments, Mayor Council comments, and we'll adjourn. Yes, there'll be an addition of a second police grant as well. Any questions? All right, up next we have firefighter upstaffing request with Chief Lohr.
Good afternoon, Mayor Council.
Afternoon.
I did want to bring to your attention our colleagues in Frederick County laid to rest today. Captain Laird, who lost his life in the line of duty last Wednesday in Hymansville in a tragic house fire. And certainly any of you that have colleagues in Frederick County could extend your heartfelt sympathy there. I'm here today to request to fill 2 positions beginning the first pay period of October, one due to normal retirement within our funded allotment, one that would be over complement in anticipation of our next vacancy, which we're almost certain to occur within the fiscal year. And the basis for this request is that it costs us the same amount of money to train 1 or 101 firefighters. Our general practice has been, most recently, that if we hire 2, 3, 4 employees at one time, we run them through at least an 8-week day work academy, and then they're assigned out on shifts for a period of time until they count as minimum staffing. And this will allow us the opportunity not only to fill the vacancy that we have, but be fully prepared to fill the next vacancy we anticipate. So this is formal approval for that.
You guys good?
Sounds good to me.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, up next, City Administrator.
Wanted to provide council with an update on where we're at with the American Rescue Plan money. Michelle is here to answer questions too. We've met regularly since May, brainstorming and producing a draft list of projects that were based upon the results of the community survey that was commissioned by the body earlier this year. Discussions held during the Mayor and Council Strategic Planning Workshop held last spring, and then input from staff on key initiatives that were postponed or canceled due to the COVID-19 pandemic in the last fiscal year. We have also had preliminary discussions with several organizations, including the Washington County Health Department, the Homeless Coalition, Hagerstown Community College, to ask them for information that they could provide us on potential scope of work and costs associated with that work based upon some of the items on this project list that fit the requirements as put out through the interim final report by the Treasury Department. We expect to have that information in by early September, and we would expect then to come to you with not only the final list of projects we have to recommend to you to use this money, the first allocation of this money for, but then we'd also be able to provide you some more specific scope of works and the costs that will be associated with each of those projects to give you as much information as we can on what our recommendations are. Obviously, you can decide not to accept any of them, accept some of them, provide your own recommendations that we would do the same type of research on, and bring that information back to you when we have it. Just as a reminder, the restrictions on the use of this money as placed by the federal government is that 50% of the funding we received in May of 2021, that was $10.2 million. 50% is anticipated to be received in May of 2022. That'll be the remaining 10.2 for a total of 20.4 million. The deadline to have all the funds spent is December 31st, 2024. The allowable use of funds is to respond or mitigate COVID health emergency or its negative economic impacts, including assistance to households, small businesses, nonprofits, and aid for tourism, travel, and hospitality. Also to provide essential workers with premium pay, to cover revenue losses incurred as a result of COVID, and finally to make necessary investments in water, sewer, or broadband infrastructure. At this time, we've utilized $2.153 million of the 10.2 towards the council-approved full-time staff stipends. We have commitments from council to hire a grants coordinator during this ARPA period. That has gotten very good responses and very qualified responses. We're extremely happy with the pool of candidates we'll have to choose from that I think will be able to hit the ground running. And then lastly, we still don't have 100% confidence on the requirements that are going to be placed on us as to the spending of this money because the final rule has not been put out yet. Once that gets put out, then we'll really be able to come back and ferret through this list. We've gotten rid of about 15 or 16 of the projects, based upon the fact that once we went through the interim final rule, determined that we could not use that money to go towards those projects. We will have to find another way or work with Congressman Trone's office to find other funding sources for that. I'll have a project list for you. It's not really meant to be, really publicly available yet. We don't want to give anybody an idea that there might be a project that gets funded and then eventually it doesn't get funded and get hopes up. We also have not yet had a conversation with the county. I am hopeful that we'll have that at some point in September. I don't know how much fruition anything is going to come from that meeting. I think they have pretty much determined what they're going to do with their money. But we're always open to go partner with them if we can provide a needed community, fulfill a needed community service by combining money. That would always be a good thing to do if we could do it. Any questions, concerns?
Only other thing, just I'll quickly mention, is that we do have an initial report that has to be filed by August 31st, and then our next compliance report is a little bit more in-depth, and it must be filed by the end of October and then quarterly thereafter.
We've had great cooperation with everyone we've talked to. Everyone is very appreciative that we are looking to the community interests, and we're really taking that community survey that was done, and I think we are hitting pretty much all of the main concerns that were in that survey and trying to apply money towards services to help either in remediation or in new projects to help out with those concerns. The other caveat in it is the fact there's an infrastructure bill hanging out there in the federal government at some point. Congress will be back, the House of Representatives will be back early to deliberate that. We don't want to put money into infrastructure through ARPA money. If that same money could be used on the infrastructure side, we can pull that out of ARPA and use it for another project. So we're still kind of in a little bit of limbo with that, but that is what it is.
And then last but not least, stormwater. So we do have a separate stormwater fund here, and with ARP funds, water, wastewater does also include stormwater type projects that are administered underneath the guidelines of the MDE that would qualify for monies through there. Same types of projects are still right now included in the infrastructure bill.
So, in the memo, you have a sentence here at the end of the second paragraph that says we can also use our time during work session. Entertain any suggestions you have for us to add to the list and research. I just assume you don't mean this work session.
It could be, yeah, we'll have one.
You're using that term generically.
What I'll do is get this listing to you in its potentially final form once we get the input from the others, and then we can sit down and go through it. I almost think it might take an entire work session just for this one topic, maybe take an hour and a half or so, and work through these, because there's going to be a lot of detail, especially on a couple of these projects, that I think y'all need to make sure you're aware of before you make a decision on whether it's going to be something you want to see move forward on.
But the other thing is if anybody had any other ideas or suggestions, not knowing what we've already considered, or anything that was outside of the community survey, and if you had something that somebody's approached you about, we're definitely willing to hear and write those down this evening.
I guess for me, and I don't know if it may be better to wait, until that meeting when we see a list, but I mean, at some point, I think that this body's gonna have to have that sort of spaghetti against the wall conversation where you're gonna throw things out and staff's gonna say, these 6 things you threw out are eligible, and these 5 aren't, and of the 6 that are eligible, there might be a majority that is okay with 4 of them. That are outside of the those 3 areas that you've already sort of looked to fine, 90.
And you've taken the survey and our goal-setting session and kind of combined the two.
Yep.
To make it, right, so we kind of did have that spaghetti against the wall meeting in a way.
I mean, that was before we knew.
Correct, but I'm just saying,
This
those were our
existed.
goals, and if you can combine that with the community survey, it probably puts a nice list together for us to be
I
able
would
to
say it
dissect.
probably consists of probably 90% of what that list is, are those
So
two.
that's, yeah.
Those two areas.
I mean, I think the only big dollar or the big item really that stands out to me was one of the things that had been discussed was just the overall concept of general economic incentives or being able to enhance and add money to our city of Hagerstown, our local Invest Hagerstown money. And that is actually something we cannot do. We
Right.
cannot do overall general economic
We can
incentives.
come up with something new, a new program that is not based upon current economic development incentives, but we cannot enhance what we already have.
Okay.
And we've done some of that with the list.
Looking forward to it.
Any other questions, comments?
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, up next, we have a review of the letter of intent and proposed lease terms for 6 North Potomac Street.
Good evening. We're here to review the proposed letter of intent based on the draft lease terms included in your packet for the Foundry located at Elizabeth Hager Center, 6 North Potomac. Here with me tonight is Jen Milady from the Foundry, who's looking to lease the space. The space was most recently used by the Welcome Center for the Convention and Visitors Bureau of Washington County and has been vacated as of January 31st of this year. I'm going to turn it over to Jen to talk a little bit about the Foundry and the business. Jen?
Hi,
Hi.
thank you. So my business in Stanton, Virginia, the Foundry Pop-Ups, is a retail incubator, and we provide space for new businesses to test out their idea in downtown Stanton. We have about 25 different businesses, and we're only about 3 months old. We opened with the expectation that we'd only have about half of that, and we grew very, very quickly. And because of that, I'm looking for a second location, and I'm considering Hagerstown and have found this opportunity at the Hager Center.
Perfect. So I'm going to review some of the key terms from the draft lease. So the lease would be effective November 1st, 2021 through October 31st of 22. The first year would be $30,000 of annual rent. Second year would actually scale down to $20,300 and have 3% incremental increases year after year as optional one-year terms. We expect the alteration cost to total estimate to be about $28,000, including electrical, vinyl flooring, paint, drywall. The material costs would be covered for the difference in year 1 to year 2 as far as the fit-out costs. And water and sewer would be included in rent with the provision to, if the Foundry needed to expand after year 1, to provide a 90-day notice and look to locate into a new retail space in the city, needing at least 2,500 square feet. In addition, we'd have a first right of refusal period of 45 days included in the letter of intent as the Foundry looks to secure some additional grant funding. Any questions about the key terms of the lease?
Sounds exciting.
It is,
Yeah.
and horrifying.
Yeah. Yeah. You'll
So
be fine.
we'll have the letter of intent at next week's regular session, and then we'll be actually bringing the lease back at a future regular session.
Sounds
Welcome to
good.
Hagerstown.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, up next, we have the Hamilton Building Incentive.
Good afternoon. I'm here to review the financial incentive agreement between the City of Hagerstown and Aries Investment LLC for stabilization of the Hamilton Building at 8698 West Washington. and to support the project since the November 2020 partial collapse of a section of the building, and to de-escalate a situation with the bank for the construction loan. At the end of July, we committed, the mayor and city council committed funding of $716,106. And that motion stated that the financial incentive agreement would outline the full terms and conditions of the grant and would be approved separately. So let me give you a few highlights of the financial incentive agreement. It outlines the history of the agreements to date. It defines the project as the renovation of 37 apartments on the 2nd through 5th floors, and includes improvements to many of the common areas, and also includes the redevelopment of 7 commercial units. It provides a grant of half the amount, $358,053, and a loan to grant for the other half, for the total $716,106. It defines the specific uses of the $716,000 for vendors that are outlined in an exhibit, and the incentive would be paid by joint check, where applicable, to both Aries and the respective vendors. And the expenses would be paid in the order listed in the exhibit, and includes an amount of just over $55,000 for a contract extension of rented scaffolding and shoring equipment through December of 2021. And then the balance of the payment, whatever is remaining, taking us to the total, would be paid to Yugo LLC, Yugo Management, for a portion of their work toward the project. It requires that the vendors be paid and provide release of liens by a September 17th, 2021 date. The incentive grant and the loan to grant replaces several of our City of Hagerstown programs. So this can't be layered also with our Invest Hagerstown City Center redevelopment grant, the Partners in Economic Progress program, the Life Safety Infrastructure grant program, our facade grant program, and any future upper floor housing grant programs that may be administered by the city. We would look at eligibility for the citywide redevelopment grants under the Invest Hagerstown program at the time of commercial tenant fit out, and that would be evaluated on a case-by-case basis at that time. It requires the project to be completed to the guidelines and standards of our Invest Hagerstown program, and looks to a completion deadline date of February 1st of 2023, giving approximately 18 months for completion of the entire project. It defines Aries properties as all those owned by Aries and as well as other entities, and requires all of those entities to maintain good standing with the city, and provides a clawback provision in the case that the project is not completed by the February 1, 2023 deadline. 50%, the loan to grant portion, would be paid back to the city in that scenario. And it also gives a number of other clawback provisions in the case of other situations that would trigger such a clawback. And it also requires a personal guarantee for the individuals associated with the Aries Investment LLC. So those are just some of the highlights of the financial incentive agreement. I'm happy to answer any questions about the agreement.
What do you think the total investment is?
The total investment, as Aries has identified, that originally they had envisioned that this was a $2 to $3 million project. Due to the collapse, the partial collapse, they believe that it adds an additional $2 million to the cost, roughly, to the cost of the project.
I mean, I ask that question because, you know, we're often given this feedback that, you know, I can't believe government's sort of letting this building, you know, fall down or fall apart or fall in decay or fall in decline. And so I just want folks out there to understand that are of that mindset that the government can save, every building, can fix every building. I mean, here's a situation where there was no other choice but for government to assist in, saving a building that I think we all would agree is a fairly good historic structure, a key component of our downtown. And not only is the private investor putting $4 to $5 million into doing it, we're putting up $700,000. And every taxpayer, for every penny's $250,000, $750,000. Every penny's $12. That means every tax-paying, property in the city's putting $36 roughly, to assist in that effort. And so for folks that are out there that are trying to put that in quantifiable terms, government just can't do it. Here's an instance where we're almost have to do it because there really isn't a lot of other options privately, and we're assisting private, property owners in this manner to do it that are putting up 6 to 7 times the funding that we are to make that happen for a building that frankly isn't astronomically different than so many of the other buildings that exist downtown and of older buildings and style in the city in general. And so that, when we have those conversations about, what we can and what we cannot save, what is and what is not salvageable, what should and should not be invested in, I just hope that folks, keep those numbers in mind when they're looking at, the public and government by default to be that sole investment party. It's just not, it's not possible.
Well, the increase, one of the things that I look at it, and I've been, championing this building for probably the last 6 years because I know what this building adds to our core, and it's like one of the very first buildings you see coming into the core of the city of Hagerstown. And the ability to be able to bring that building back to the retail establishments on the first floor and the rentals on the second, third, and fourth floors and those kind of things. It's a worthwhile building. It's not like the Delta Hosiery building, and it's not like the old Dagmar or the old Midtown. And this is a historically significant building right in the center of our core. And this, when this is done, the tax benefit to the city of Hagerstown is 3 to 4 times more than it was prior to the development starting. So it's an investment in our future of the city of Hagerstown and the core of the city of Hagerstown. And that's how I come to the conclusion that it's a good investment, because the return on investment is good.
Right. And that 380 or whatever, I mean, that's a risk that we just simply can't take on every building.
No.
It's just not practical.
Or could have just left Johnson Street closed.
Right.
Everybody was happy about that.
No.
So anyway, it is a significantly good project. It needs to be completed.
Necessary.
Yep.
Right. I would say supporting upper floor housing is an important downtown redevelopment strategy. It has economic impacts of tax base, but it also creates what we're striving for in a 24-hour downtown, which creates other economic benefits and other spurred commercial development.
Feet
So
on the
that's all
street.
very
Yep.
positive thing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, up next, fiscal year 21 year-end adjustment requests.
Good afternoon again. So I just want to take a quick minute to cover 3 different items. As we have started, the accounting and finance staff has started our year-end process, and we're starting to look at various accounts and monitoring some things. One of the 3 items on here, I'm going to actually jump to number 3, is an item that this body, I think, has previously discussed, but then I realized we never came back and did anything in a formal manner. But years ago, we had some monies that was set aside within general funds, CIP, for capital improvement programs. We had money specifically set aside for the portion that the city was going to contribute and do in the demolition of the MELP, the old MELP property. Our portion has now been officially completed, and we have about $67,000 remaining. So what I would like to do is, just like we do with all the other CIPs, is at the end of the year, if there was a little bit of dollars left, it would go into an undesignated, it would stay within the CIP, it would go in undesignated, and then if Rodney has a project that goes over throughout the year and needs additional funding, on the consent agenda, we would identify the CIP fund balance and be able to utilize it in that manner. Again, this is just to cover an item we've previously discussed, but I didn't do anything formally, and I want to, because of the dollar amount, I wanted to make sure that we did that, and if everybody's okay, I'll do a motion that will go on for the work session later this month. Is
And that
everybody
would be
okay with that
available-
one?
That would be available for any CIP project.
Yes, because it's unrestricted funding at that point.
You mean like the bathrooms that are on our next agenda?
Or
It's the same amount, right?
if the skate park is over budget, something like that.
Correct. Or the UIP Plaza. You know, we get some of these projects and they have such variety of funding sources, but then what happens is if you purchase something, we might still have total funding for that project, but if the funding source that's left, let's say it's a grant, won't cover certain items, then Rodney would still have to come to me and say, hey, do you have additional dollars that I could utilize for this? And these are the types of things that we're talking about. So if everybody's okay with that one, I'll bring it back. The next two, the first of them has to do with professional court extension, again, this is the city portion that we're doing for professional boulevard extension. Typically at the point where we would get notified of receiving federal dollars, we would come back, especially once they're large, and with the agreement, go ahead and get approval to accept that. We have received word that we are getting about 1.25 million from Appalachian Regional Commission, ARC grants, it's federal dollars. Those grants, again, that's not going to cover the entire of our project, but those grants are federal dollars, and we have to put local city match there. Because we didn't get the actual documents and agreements in place yet, we couldn't come and do that as part of this. So what I would like to do in fiscal year 21, because we have it, is go ahead and move additional transfers from the general funds and put them specifically in this project. Our match is about $250,000. For the rest of the project, we have asked for other funding sources. Again, it's just good to keep it clean and make sure that everything we said we were going to do, like when we applied for the federal ARC money, that we go ahead and move it all over as we have that obligation.
Yep.
Any questions or problems with that one? All right, last but not least. So every year as part of the process of starting the budget, which I cannot believe will be starting soon, but we look at the health insurance fund, and if there is a surplus within the health insurance fund and there is sufficient months worth of cash on hand, we can take a surplus from there and allocate it back out to the other funds. So for our health insurance fund, it's just a separate fund that we have. We move monies into there for active employees and for retirees. We put monies in there every single week. And then because we're self-insured, if we don't actually have monies that we've paid out in claims, we end up with a little bit extra. So this is the surplus we're talking about. I utilized in grand total for fiscal year 21, $484,000, which was a health insurance surplus the year before. And I allocated it back to the general fund, electric fund, water fund, wastewater fund. $380,000 of that is general fund, just so that puts it in perspective. I allocate it back to the funds based on how the money gets put there originally. Anyway, I do that just to help it's within our policies, it's what we do, and it also helps us to balance the budget. We do not need that, but I have been desperately trying to find a way to fund more money into our OPEB trust fund, which is our retirement plan for our employees, the health insurance plan. We definitely need a way to boost more money there. So I'd like to go ahead and allocate these monies back to the health insurance fund and then move it into our trust plan.
Okay?
I'd be interested to find out what that unfunded portion of OPEB is currently for the city.
I will know soon. Got the preliminary, I got a draft of an actuarial report for June 30, but I haven't yet looked at it. And I would need to review it for it. But I can tell you with the way the financial market is and
Right.
interest rates being down, we definitely need every little bit
I
to help.
understand. Yeah, I understand.
You guys
So
good
are we
with that?
okay for me to put that there for next week's vote? And then I'll get back to you on the percentage.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you all.
Thank you. Up next, the MAC water storage tank replacement.
All right, take this. Good evening. I don't know if everybody's met Bill Loon, but this is Bill Loon. He's our water operations manager. So there's some new faces up here since he's been with me last time. Bill and I kind of have some, I guess, unfortunate information to share this evening. The Mac water tank, which has been in service since the 60s, in late April sprung a leak. The floor and the sidewall separated about a 12 to 15-inch gap. We were very fortunate when it happened because we just so happened to have somebody up there mowing who saw water squirting out of through the coating around the ring wall. So we were able to drain the tank and get it offline, get it drained. So we didn't have anything catastrophic happen. Since that time, we requested emergency authorization, and we've started, emergency authorization was approved, and actually we brought that back to Mayor and Council and was approved formally through Mayor and Council, but we've started the repairs to the tank, which are just under $75,000. A similar incident happened in 2019, but it was a much smaller, and it was $1,400 versus $75,000. We've had Hazen and Sawyer look at the tank. We've had a couple tank companies out looking at the tank, and really the bottom line is that the tank has reached its useful life, and we really need to move forward with a new tank and likely some system improvements associated with changes in the water system from the 1960s to now. That tank is important in our system. It provides both pressure as well as fire protection in our Zone 3. This project was not identified originally in our CIP, for replacement. It will be in the CIP this coming year. We will also include a funding package to MDE. Design bidding and construction, plus or minus 2 years is what we would estimate. And that would also include the demolition of the existing tank. What we would like to do is next month bring a proposal back from Hazen and Sawyer, piggybacking on an existing open contract to go ahead and move forward with the design, bidding, and construction phase services for this tank. Because that was a formally bid, that was bid based on Maryland standards, we could also include that as part of our funding package to MDE, potentially request reimbursement for it, but if not, MDE does like to see some sort of local funding go into it. If we're not successful with that funding source, we would be looking to use water fund cash to fund this project. And the water fund is able to fund this project without the MDE bond issue, but clearly the MDE bond issue would be a preference. So with your blessing, we would like to bring that proposal back next month for a review and approval to keep this project moving forward. Any questions?
Bill, what's the status of the tank right now?
It's in repair right now. They're gonna be performing the grouting on the floor. A good bit of the sand, the grout, was removed when the leak happened. It was a pretty extensive leak. So that's being taken care of right now. I would say we're probably a month and a half out. When you consider the repair and all the testing that has to go on after the repair, we have to, do BACT and VOC, and that all takes time. So we're probably a month and a half out on the repair.
Would this qualify to use ARP funds?
Good.
We could,
If not ARP, infrastructure money, potentially, yes.
yeah.
That'd be the first choice.
Yeah.
Yes,
First, then MDE.
whichever one comes
Yeah,
first.
whichever one.
Yeah, it's on the list. Yeah.
Okay. I think
We
that's
can't
the
use that
preference.
spray stuff like they advertise on
That would be-
TV.
We talked about trying to get that guy in.
Well, I'll take
It'd be a little cheaper.
It would have made a great commercial.
Yeah, it would.
You guys good with?
Yes.
Thank you.
very much.
All right, decks in Hagerstown's townhome communities.
Yes, Don already passed them out.
Awesome. All right. So I wanted to come to you tonight to talk about an education effort that our department's going to be doing about decks in our townhome communities. So I'm sure that you all are aware that on July 4th, unfortunately, we had a deck that collapsed here in Hagerstown. And had 2 injuries from that collapse, pretty serious injuries as well. And once we reviewed what was with that actual deck situation, there was no permit for the actual deck that was constructed at that property. Then the current homeowner actually made some structural repairs to the deck and had no permit for that as well. And during the process that all of the anchoring for the deck and the bolt placement and everything was off, and it actually went into a deteriorated wood, which would have been called through the inspection process, which ended up leading to the collapse that occurred there. So with that, we did a review of all of our decks in our townhomes, so we wanted to go over a little bit of that with you. So the one thing is, why is this actually important? And one of the things is that, some of our single-family homes have decks on them as well, but with townhomes, townhome decks are generally elevated, typically between 8 to 10 feet. So they are higher up. And if there was a failure of one of those decks, there would be more of a fall, of course, with it being higher up and causing more injury than what maybe a deck would for a single-family home. And then also that many of our townhome owners, they add decks later after the fact. Maybe not when the home was actually originally constructed, but actually later after the fact because they want to add an outdoor amenity to their home. When some of these homes are being built in these developments, that those are additional add-ons, and that's just not something that someone wants to pay for up front. And then we're always looking for, the proper approvals as well. So when you're actually going through these things, there's not only building approvals, but there's also zoning approvals that are needed. And a townhome actually gets a review from the fire department as well. So because it is attached to multiple structures at that time. So they're always looking at that. So we wanted to make sure, how to make sure that decks can be maintained to prevent any deterioration or failure. One of the things that I provided in the packet with you all was actually our application packet of what we actually have when someone applies for a deck. So you just kind of know what it is overall that we're asking for as far as our department goes. And it's a 2-page application. Honestly, the second page is just a signature and printed in your name, so there's really not much with it. And then we add in additional other things as well. So you don't have to be an architect to actually submit plans to our office for a deck. You can just fill in the blanks. What size are you using for your joist? What size are you using for your posts? Those types of things, what your spacing It's very simple application. We actually worked with Picker. Some of you all were here and back in 2017 and 18 when we had the Picker group. There was the Permits Inspections Co-Compliance Review Committee. They actually reviewed this application as well and made a couple suggestions. We made those modifications, and this is the application that we have. Want to go over a couple of deck failures. Now, this was not our deck. This is actually the one that you see here on the bottom left is Columbia, Maryland. That just happened in the last year as well. And the upper right was Anne Arundel County as well, that actually the middle part of the deck just gave away. It's just a big hole that's in there. People have been injured on all of these deck failures. The one on the bottom left was a townhome failure, so you can see it was up high and then it fell all the way down to the ground there.
Looks like the construction of the deck itself was sound.
It does look like it stayed together for the fall.
Survived the fall.
It didn't even look like a terrible.
These two are actually in Montgomery County that, again, just happened recently as well, that they were deck failures. Again, people were injured in these in addition to the other ones I showed you. And then actually the one that you haven't probably seen is a close-up view. This is our one in Hagerstown. So that is how that deck collapsed here in town. So of course it's just a headline here that listed, but that's actually my photo of when we responded during daylight hours. So that was at Park Overlook Townhome Community, which is Monet Drive. One of the things is, how can we get the message out? Back on actually May 18th, before our collapse that we had on July 4th, we did do a social media post. Now granted, not everyone gets on social media, but we do try to get the word out to let people know, make sure you're checking your decks and making sure that they are being well maintained. It did reach several thousands of people. A couple local inspectors actually shared it as well, saying, hey, I'm available to inspect your deck, reach out to me. They were doing that type of stuff there. Some of the home inspectors were doing that. When we had the collapse happen, we actually reminded everyone on July 6th that we're like, hey, look, this is serious. You should get your decks looked at. When we had the collapse happen, we looked at our Park Overlook Townhome Community. We wanted to see, was it just this one property by chance that just happened to not have permits and inspections for it, or are there other ones in the community? So we looked at Park Overlook, and we found that there were 45 decks in that community that actually had all the proper permits and approvals, and then there were 28 that did not. So that is a 38% that people did not obtain the proper permits and approvals to actually have a deck on the back of their property. So then after we saw that, that's like, oh my gosh, how many are actually in our whole entire community? We have larger ones like Havers Crossing that have a lot of townhomes. We're wondering what is the impact on that? Or then we have Northgate, some of those are older in our community. So we reviewed everything and did a lot of site visits to every single development to determine which ones actually had decks. And then we reviewed all of our street files as well to determine did they actually have a permit? Was it part of the original construction of the home? Everything, trying to look at those factors. So we came up with it. It's actually 19%, or roughly 1 out of every 5 deck in one of our townhome communities was built without permits or inspections. So we're like, how can we actually address this? So one of the first things we wanted to know is why is an evaluation needed on a deck? So just to kind of give us some basic knowledge, is that when a deck is designed, it is actually to transfer the loads on that deck to the ground. We want to make sure that it puts all the proper loads down to the ground and it's not being stressed on anywhere else on the property. So one of the things is, what are those loads? Well, it's live loads. We can use building terms all the time, but that's people that are actually on the deck. The dead loads being the actual deck itself, also being the objects that are on the deck, such as furniture, grills, whatever the scenario may be, and then also snow. We have in our community, we got to always remember that snow is going to be laying on these decks. And then also the lateral loads, so the wind and also the settlement that actually occurs as well, so that's trying to make sure everything's stabilized in there. And then the lack of approvals, which is our concern, presents a paramount concern in our community. We don't want to see another collapse. So we decided, let's do an education program of the decks in our community. Like I said, we had about 1 out of 5 did not have the proper permits, but 4 out of 5 actually did. At some point in time in their construction, they had all of the proper approvals. That's 478 properties in town. So that's a really good number. And we came up with this deck safety flyer that we would provide to everyone that actually has all the proper approvals and letting them know what it actually is that they should do for proper deck maintenance. One of the things with the collapse that occurred that we could tell that there was not the proper flashing between the deck and the wall, which led to the water getting in behind the board that attached the deck to the house to deteriorate, which then caused the collapse. So we could see all of those things when we were just out on site. So one of the things is proper flashing and how to make sure that you can actually detect maybe any future problems with the deck, and then also some care that you can actually do with your deck. So this is what's just being provided to everyone that actually had proper approvals for their decks. Then we talk about the 111 that did not have the proper approvals. And honestly, most of them are probably not the owners at the time the deck was there. Probably the person purchased the property, the deck was on the back of their house when they purchased it, and they just assumed everything was fine. But unfortunately, 111 homes does not have the proper approvals. So we went with the North American Deck and Rail Association that puts out stuff about deck safety all the time and use their checklist of how they have for people to evaluate decks. So what we're asking for the people that had these homes is to make sure they have their deck evaluated. That's either by a Maryland licensed home inspector or also by a Maryland licensed structural engineer. We're not saying that our office will be doing those inspections for a couple reasons. One is we haven't seen it through the whole process, but also I talked to Kevin DeHaven. If a deck collapsed after the city looked at it after it was constructed, the city is liable for any damages that would occur to either the property or the people. So we don't think that's the best choice of action for the city to move forward with our office looking at these decks.
Is the inspector, like the licensed inspector, would they be responsible if something happened afterward?
They would. So once we actually have done the follow-up with everyone here, kind of reaching out to anyone that actually has a deck already constructed or that is one that was not permitted through our office, we would follow up with everyone about 30 days afterwards. Now granted, it's 111. I can't guarantee it's 30 days exactly. It's approximately 30 days afterwards, trying to follow up with everyone to see where things are. We're looking for voluntary compliance. It's an educational outreach. We want to let people know that are living in their homes, you have a deck that's on the back of your house that it didn't have any approvals. You need someone to take a look at this. The goal is to ensure that these unpermitted decks are able to support the imposed loads. And our goal is that each May, we're actually going to send out the deck safety flyer to everyone to let them remind them, this is just what you need to do to make sure you have a proper deck, that your deck is being maintained. Here's the things how to maintain it. Here's the care for it. So that's our goal to kind of move forward. I put in here a special thank you to our staff. This took a lot of time for different things. So Pam Harris, Vicki Hastings, Sue Kyler, Sean Brown, and Donnie Harcum were all the ones that were walking around all these communities trying to determine the stuff. And granted, it's cool now. It was hot during those days. And they were out there trying to figure out them all, working off of maps and trying to see who had actual decks and who did not. So it took a lot of time for them. That's all I had. It was just letting you all know what the education effort that we were. If you have any concerns or comments that we can maybe modify things, we certainly can. But it was just an education effort because you may be reached out to about this.
So, when you use the term education effort, and I just want to make sure I hear you correctly when you say, for the folks that have permitted decks, we're going to send them a flyer, say, hey, just a reminder, you need to, make sure things are good each year. So for the folks that you don't, you're going to say, hey, we believe you should get somebody to look at it, or that you have to get somebody to look at it?
And that's a very good question, and they should, because we have no approvals for their decks, and that's what we're going to be letting them know.
But it should.
It
But you're
should.
not going out to
So if 111 say
strong arm
no,
enforcement.
Correct.
right, so if 111 say no, we're not getting anybody, thanks for letting us know, but we're gonna wing it, and hope for the best. You're not going out afterwards and saying, you didn't get anybody to look at it, we need an evaluation submitted for the 5.
That's not the goal. The goal is to make them aware and educate them of the unpermitted deck.
I just want to be absolutely clear, you're not going to require any of these 111 that you've identified to send you any paperwork after you notify them that, hey, you didn't get it. Whoever owned either you or your predecessor, you never got a permit to build this deck.
Right, the goal is that we want to receive those paperworks to know that they are safe, and that is the goal, to get that back from them. Are we going to fine people for failure to do those things? No, that is not the goal.
So you won't follow up and say, hey, you need to get somebody to look.
We'll follow up in 30 days saying, we haven't heard from you, you know, kind of what is your
We highly
plan of
encourage you
action?
to do that.
Yeah,
But we're not going to require you. We're going to highly encourage you, right?
correct.
Okay. That's a lot more clear because, like, when I read the deck evaluation checklist, there are obviously any number of things on there that, you know what I mean, like, you necessarily aren't looking for. You're looking for that not to happen,
Right,
not somebody to not be able to hold a handrail down the steps because somebody decided not to put whatever required handrail in.
correct.
Or, you know, somebody's kid not to get their head stuck through the railings because it's 4.5 and not 4.
Right,
You're looking to make sure it doesn't fall down while the kid's head's through the railing.
correct. Correct.
Thank you.
Unless you're that first deck that stayed intact, then it's okay.
Hey, Paul, there's more structures that have decks than just these ones you looked at.
This is the townhome community.
This
We
is the
did
town-
not do
There's
the
gonna be
single
thousands in the
families.
city. I mean,
So-
there's gonna be thousands.
The brochure that you did, is that something that perhaps we could put into, like, maybe a water bill and send out so that everybody would, you know, I have a deck that was permitted,
Mine too.
that, trust me. And that might be something I would look at, and you can check too, by the way. But it might be something, might help somebody else that lives in a house and not a townhome.
Correct, yes, and that would be the goal, is trying to get in on the water bill accounts
Yep.
each May, so that we could just send that stuff out to the
Okay.
residents.
Okay, cool.
Thanks for putting this together. I actually shared this memo packet to the Haggers Crossing unofficial HOA page, just to give a heads up, because I'm one of those residents that is permitted in Haggers Crossing, but having this checklist to evaluate my deck, I'm gonna definitely use it.
Great.
That's
Well,
good.
That's
I
scary
applaud
stuff.
you for
Cute.
being proactive
Right.
as opposed to reactive, even though the collapse happened on July 4th, but you had started out prior to that. And that's good, and get people informed, so appreciate that.
Thank you.
That he's proud of Paul.
Why are you whispering?
Just wondering if you know he's proud of.
I heard him.
No one else did,
Very
yeah.
quiet.
That was very quiet.
Well, I'll begin to talk a little louder in the future.
I'm just real proud of him.
Yes, I am, and I get melancholy when I get proud.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks.
That's not a word I would associate.
City administrator.
Just a super busy weekend in Hagerstown this weekend. Maryland International Film Festival, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday at various locations. Look on their Facebook page for the schedule. And then a scaled down, but still nonetheless great event is back, August-Oktoberfest in University Plaza, not the Central Lot, but University Plaza this year. And it looks like it's going to be a nice day for it. It's not going to be 190 degrees like sometimes it is. For August-Oktoberfest, it looks like a nice day, so I hope we see a lot of foot traffic downtown. That's all.
Shelley?
Nothing tonight.
Bob?
I'm gonna, echo Shelley.
Wow.
Nothing.
Okay, Tiara?
Nothing for once.
Just real quick, Mayor Hose, you know, obviously was mayor when I served as county commissioner. Obviously, I have a lot of family from the Clear Spring area, but I will say this, in Clear Spring, as a county commissioner, I would go there, because I would visit 2 towns every month, and so every 4 months I would go there. They had the smallest meeting room, but he was always the most welcoming mayor, no offense to all the other mayors, at that time, to every meeting, and very engaging, and that was a very good relationship.
I don't recall you coming to my meetings but once. Okay.
You weren't very
Thank
welcoming,
you for
apparently.
ruining the moment.
Or you can leave an impression, one or the other, I don't know what you're.
Roxburgh guy.
Just saying.
Hire next week, please. Nothing. Got nothing.
Scott pretty much covered everything I had. The only other thing, I just wanted to thank the Medal of Honor Neighborhoods First for having their annual Day of Hope at Wheaton Park Saturday. It was a good day, and hope to see everyone this weekend out and about. And we're adjourned. Thanks.
welcome to Council Wrap. I'm joined by Neighborhood Services Manager Paul Falk, and we're going to talk decks, and in particular townhouse decks, which is something that you presented to Mayor and Council earlier this evening, Paul. And it's very concerning when you think about all of those decks within the city, but you're looking at a rather small percentage, really, and you kind of need to get your arms around this when you look at a deck collapse. Obviously, that's very concerning, and that's what your group looked at, was motivated not only by that, because you had started before that to kind of look at this whole deck situation, but once you have a deck collapse, I think that gets everyone's attention. So tell me a little bit about this attempt at the educational process for people. And I know it was discussed in the meeting, but just kind of go over that a little bit, because that's the important part of all of this right now.
So with the education project that we're doing here, the effort, there's about 600 decks in our townhome communities, and about 500 of them actually had permits and had approvals for everything. So we are going to look at letting them know about the proper deck maintenance and how to take care of your deck, just so that everyone could be reminded of how to make sure you're not allowing something to deteriorate. Unfortunately, during our review, we discovered that approximately 100 decks in our community did not have all the proper permits and approvals. And the concerning part is most of them were probably not the owners that constructed that deck. They don't know how they were constructed. They purchased it with the deck on the back. And we want to make sure that those decks are safe as well. So we have a checklist for them to go through with a licensed professional, making sure things are actually going to be proper and they will support them actually enjoying the outdoor amenity that they have on their home.
So is it a concerted effort then to sort of sidestep the process by those who have not gotten these decks permitted the way they should be? And as you said, the worst part is there are people who have bought these properties then who have no idea what went on before they came there, who are now basically buying what could be an accident waiting to happen.
That's a very good term, saying accident waiting to happen, and that is the concern. And the reason why we want to do more of an education effort and having a professional look at it is for them to get the reassurance that it actually is safe for them to be out on their deck. When they didn't have the permits and approvals, we didn't look at it through the process.
And how difficult a process is this? Obviously, again, this is not something that your department will be doing, as you outlined in the meeting. They'll need a structural engineer or someone of that ilk.
Or a licensed home
right,
inspector.
to do that. But how difficult a process is this? Because to me, I don't have a deck on my house, but at the same time, if I'm aware of what you're presenting, as far as the educational component, I'm going, well, I don't want to take that chance. So if I don't want to take that chance, what am I up against here? How difficult is it to get this done?
To get the evaluation
Yes,
done?
yeah.
So to get the evaluation done would be a pretty straightforward process. It would be contacting a Maryland licensed professional to come out and take a look at the deck. They are going to charge a fee for it because it's a fee for their service, but they will come out, take a look at the deck, and go through the checklist that we provided, as we want people to make sure they're crossing off all of the things that would be potential issues for a failure at a deck. So they're looking at the connections to the house, they're looking at the porch posts. Are they big enough to support those imposed loads? Sometimes people use 4x4 posts rather than 6x6 because they're cheaper. But if it's not big enough to support that big of a deck or people on it, want to make people aware that they could have a safety issue with their deck.
Yeah, clearly, we don't want this happening to anyone else. When we look at some of those pictures that you showed, very, very concerning. And then the potential for injury, not only to those who own the home, but you have some friends over, kids, whatever it may be. I mean, obviously, it extends to everyone. I guess my question then is, you started with the townhomes, but there are more decks in the city. So where do you go from here in your department to get your arms around all of these other decks that are out there and provide this same sort of educational information?
Yeah, the one thing with townhomes, why we focused on that, is that typical decks in a townhome are 8 to 10 feet off of the ground. So it could be a larger fall, which would create more severe injury to an individual that would be on a deck at a townhome. most single-family home decks are typically 3 feet off the ground. They're not as far off where, although someone could get injured, the severity of their injury is probably lessened by a deck on a single-family home. And to answer your question, how could we actually get the education out there to everyone? We don't know who has all decks in Hagerstown. We could drive around and figure those out, but every home in Hagerstown would be very difficult to do.
Yeah.
Our effort is going to be that May is always Deck Safety Month. That is something that has been in our industry as known. So with that May month, we're going to do bill inserts every year, trying to remind everyone of how to do proper deck maintenance of their at their home, so they can make sure it's well maintained, and then also identify any potential issues with their deck, because we give a couple tips on there as well of what potential issues could be.
I don't want to go too far off the path that we're following here as it relates to decks, but I think one of the other things that's been in the consciousness of not only the town, the county, but also the country is some of these larger buildings, like the Seaside property down in Florida and what happened there. And with your department, overseeing permitting and things of this nature and going out, I mean, hey, let's, the Hamilton building for that matter. What are you seeing? Are you seeing anything that is trending in a negative direction when it comes to that? Because one of the things you mentioned was how much some of this costs, and just the materials in general. And clearly, since the pandemic hit, the cost of materials skyrocketed. I think it might be coming down a little bit now, but still much more than it was before. So people try to take shortcuts from time to time. So I guess my question to you is, you kind of come in sometimes and people sort of look at you as the bad guy. They're like, man, he's trying to find something that I'm doing wrong. But many times when people are thinking that way, they potentially are doing something wrong. They're trying to get away with something. You're not necessarily trying to slap them on the wrist and treat them in a way where you're like, hey, we're the authority, you have to do it this way. But you're doing that for everyone's safety. You're trying to keep the community and the town safe. So what kind of a double-edged sword is that for you? Because you've done so much in terms of creating this type of, I want to say, positive energy with your department and saying, hey, we want to be a partner with you. We want to make things work. We're not coming in to throw a monkey wrench into what you're doing. We're trying to help you do things right the first time and never wind up in a position where there's an issue down the road. So can you address that a little bit and just the way that you sort of approach that?
Yeah, so with any type of permit application, of course, there's always a fee associated with things. So there are inspections, there's a fee, and then, of course, associated inspections with it. And that can be a deterrent to people that want to go through that process. But as you said, it's always for people's safety, to make sure everyone is safe. And the goal is that always to make sure that people are safe in our community. It is one of those things we don't want to have to respond to a situation where something unfortunately did collapse. And you mentioned different places that have, and we've responded to those when it's in our community. We did not go to Florida for that one.
Right.
But it is just making sure that everything is safe. It is a difficult path to achieve, but we want to make sure everyone is safe here. That's just a goal. We want to have the personify in Hagerstown that you can have a safe structure, you can be safe in your home, you have the reassurance that when you go out on a deck or go through your home, it has been constructed to a standard that is nationally recognized, and that you feel that safe and comfort that you are supposed to feel in your home.
Yeah, let's get back to those decks just to conclude. What's something that stood out to you when you saw those numbers, when your team went out and they compiled all of that information? Because I think you can make anything out of statistics when you look at them, but to you, what was the biggest takeaway?
I guess at first it was the raw number, looking at everything. And the alarming thing was just looking at all of the decks that are constructed in our town, that potentially didn't have the proper approvals for stuff. And you see that people have their lawn, or I'm gonna say lawn for deck furniture out on the decks. You can tell that they use it on a frequent basis. And the more alarming thing is that where's gonna be the next one that this happens at? And although it's nice when Hagerstown makes headlines, I don't like us to make headlines at this time.
Yeah, none of us do, that's for sure. Planning and Code Administration Department does a podcast called Hubbub. Is this something that has been or will be covered on one of those podcasts?
That is a very good question. I do not recall it actually being covered in one of our past podcasts, but that is a good idea for a topic in the future.
Well, we're all full of ideas. It's always easy to throw ideas out, but no, as you said, in all seriousness, this is a very serious issue because I think you're looking, 1 out of 5 unpermitted, has not been inspected, and you're like, well, okay, that's 19%, but you really don't want one single one. So, I mean, that's a lot to combat. And talk about May being the safety month, and certainly would focus a lot on that. But every single day, I think anyone who has a deck really needs to think about this and just to remain vigilant. And, if you haven't had your deck inspected, and that's the other thing. I mean, how often should someone have their deck looked at by someone who's authorized to do that? I mean, is this something that should happen, within a certain amount of time on a regular basis?
One of the things is that the National Deck Association, they have a couple other acronyms in there, but the National Deck Association does recommend it being done on an annual basis.
Okay.
You are going out on your deck, and in this community, we have snow on our decks that could cause, it's sitting there and it's just melting away. We're not shoveling the snow off of our deck. And they're made out of wood.
Yep.
They're going to deteriorate a little bit quicker. Got to make sure that you're keeping them safe. By having them evaluated, it doesn't hurt.
Yeah, a lot working against us that we just can't combat to begin with. So again, yeah, be very vigilant on this if you're a deck owner. And Paul, thanks for the education on this, because I think it's something. Again, it's something that so many people just take for granted. And if you're not on top of this situation, then it can wind up being a serious issue down the road. So just don't want it to get to that, and the only way to get there is by putting the word out as much as possible, and PCAT is great at doing that. Tell people, where they can find information on a regular basis, because your group does that all the time.
Yeah, one of the things that we do is we try to provide a lot of education about different things to make sure you can keep your home safe, and then also educating people about maybe what codes actually exist in your community that you might be unaware of. We do them through several platforms on social media, so you can follow us on anything by looking up PCAT Hagerstown, and that's on Facebook, Instagram, or on LinkedIn. We have TikTok as well, and then we have the Hubbub podcast that you can view things as well with that.
Some of the great TikTok videos, without question. Paul, again, appreciate it. And we will, look forward to having you back at some point in time, because there's a lot that we could certainly discuss under the PCAT umbrella for sure.
All right, thank you, Wes.
No problem. And that will do it. That is Council Wrap today. That is a wrap. We'll see you after the next work session right back here.